little bit about our panelists here tonight. We have joining us Martha Witt, who is at our far left here, your far right. Martha is the author of Broken as Things Are, which was published with Picador in 2005. She earned her MFA in creative writing from New York University, where she was a New York Times Fellow. And directly to my left here is Val Nieman. Val is the author of Wake, 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 Fidelities, and a novel, Survivors. A recipient of a NEA fellowship, Nieman was or has published fiction and poetry in the Kenyon Review, New Letters, Poetry, and she has worked as a journalist for over 20 years. Then to Val's left, we have Rebecca L. Moore, who is the Senior Program Director for Marketing at the North Carolina Arts Council, and she can address helping authors to market their published writing. So the way this will work, I've got about 6 prepared questions to ask, and then we'll open it up to you guys for your questions as well. So my first question is for Martha. Martha, what was your process like for writing Broken as Things Are? What was your process like? How long did it take? And how did you find your publisher?
It took a really long time. A lot longer than I generally admit. I actually started, the novel was different short stories, and some of the characters within the novel are drawn from these stories, so it was never in my mind a full novel in that sense until I was sort of halfway into the book, and I realized I needed some of these other characters that had appeared in these short stories to make it work for me. So I sort of brought them into the book, and then that changed the beginning of the book, of course, which meant that I had to re-envision what I was doing. So it was a really back and forth kind of process. I experimented with telling it from the perspective of different characters. I tried it in the third person, and then ultimately settled on the first person. And I was writing it before I had an editor, an agent, or anything. So I actually began it in terms of the short stories. I'd begun them in college, and then began the novel in graduate school. And so I had some feedback from other people, but I was really, in terms of all the changes I was making, I wasn't showing all of those I wasn't bringing all of those to class. I was sort of bringing my short stories still. So it wasn't that anybody saw the whole thing until I ended up getting my agent, and I did that with my short stories. I'd already published some short stories, and a friend of mine recommended this agent to me who had just started out at the time, and I sent him my stories, and he decided to take me on. And then once I finished my first draft of my book, he saw that. And then he was very, very good, and I don't think this is generally the experience people have with agents, is that they give a lot of feedback, but he did. So, there are those who do, but a lot of them do not, because they just don't have time. He was a wonderful reader, and partly I think it's because he was starting out. He was a young agent, so he just, he was really hungry to publish something, so he really worked with me very closely. And the book, in the end, became something very different than how it had started out. So that was, but even with him, it took a couple of years there. So that was my process in terms of getting an agent. In terms of publishing it, the book, he sent it around to a few places. I got some rejections, and then I took it back and I rewrote it, but I didn't do huge rewrites. I really think, in terms of my experience, it was a question of timing. The book takes place in Hillsborough, North Carolina, which is where I grew up, and it centers around this brother and sister duo, and the brother has Asperger's syndrome. So that sort of came to light and got a lot of news attention at a certain time. Asperger's did, and autism. And it was at that point that my book sold. So it wasn't that it was such a different book. It was that it was a timing issue, I really think. And it was also a Southern book. So, it was kind of easy to find a niche. So the same book that had been rejected before, when it went to sale, I had a few editors interested in it. And ultimately ended up going with Holtz, which did the hardback of the book, and then Picador the next year did the paperback, because now they actually work in conjunction. So I sold it for hardback and paperback rights both together, but with two different companies. So that's how that worked.
That's an awesome answer. So Val, tell us a little bit. We've obviously got a bunch of writers tonight in the room. What is it that motivates you as a writer? I'm always fascinated by why. Why is it that we want to write? What is it that motivates somebody to write? What is it that motivates you, do you think?
I think most of us start when we're really young. I think if I ask, when you're 6th grade, 5th grade, whatever, you start writing and you think that I need to tell these stories. There are things inside me that I don't understand. At least that seems to be for me. I often get attached to a character's dilemma. What do you do when this happens? How do you react when this happens in your life? How would you feel if you were in that place? I've just finished a novel that is going to come out in a year or so. And what got me started was hearing just a little squib of news where somebody said, oh, this happened to this woman. And I started thinking, well, what if that was me? And then that character, like most of our characters, I think, grows out of ourselves in connection with other people. And we build and change and things evolve. But that was that first little thing that just caught my attention and said, I wonder what it was like. I wonder what it felt like, and then things start rolling from there. So I guess to tell the stories, that's what motivates me.
Awesome. And Rebecca is with the North Carolina Arts Council. She's, like I said, the program, what is the title again?
Marketing Director.
Marketing Director. So she can address marketing for us as writers who are interested in marketing our work. But before we get to that, I think that's my second question. The first question that I have for you is, what exactly is the North Carolina Arts Council? What is its purpose? And then a little bit more about what your role is.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, the North Carolina Arts Council, we're a state agency, and we're part of the Department of Cultural Resources, which is a cabinet level position in North Carolina, which I think is awesome, that arts and culture are so highly recognized in North Carolina. Of course, we all know we have just great cultural resources. And looking at this room, everybody's a writer, or wants to be a writer, or likes to read, so that is great. So I congratulate you for being here, and Stacey for having this together. I actually have a poster which is hidden there, but we can maybe put it on the table and, afterwards, and list all the resources that we have for writers. But you can go to our website, ncarts.org, and if you look under grants and resources, you can look literature, and you'll see lots of information for writers and for writing organizations. We do have a very nice fellowship program for writers. The next deadline for fiction writing, I believe, is this November. It's a $10,000 fellowship, which really allows the writer to take the time away from your day-to-day responsibilities to focus on your craft and to focus on your writing. So that's a quick soundbite. I mean, we try to preserve the culture and to promote, arts and culture across North Carolina. Is that good enough?
Yes, and okay. What is your role with the council?
Oh, and I have the best job in the whole state. Which I probably shouldn't say that because it's being taped, but I do have a great job. My job, I have a wonderful team of folks that work with me. We manage the website, ncarts.org. We have a communications program where we communicate with media throughout North Carolina and really the entire world about our program and about the wonderful writers and artists we have in North Carolina. We have a research program, so we do research. We try to find out what is the economic impact of arts in the state, and it is quite significant. We've done some creative economy research. We have a cultural tourism program. We have someone full-time who goes around and travels and really seeks out really great stories about the states and really promotes. And we have 3 cultural tourism books, one of which is here at Quail Ridge, Literary Trails of Western North Carolina. I believe you have a bookmark. So we work with UNC Press, so we are kind of in the writing business ourselves to promote North Carolina.
That's an awesome answer.
Okay.
Thank you. Martha, turning it back towards the process of writing a little bit, one of the things I'm especially impressed by in reading As Broken as Things Are is these characters and how complex they are, some of the issues that they have. What is the key? One of the things I've gotten a lot of feedback for the sort of genre fiction that I write is, well, the characters aren't compelling enough. What is the key to writing compelling characters?
wish I knew the answer to that. You know, one thing I think that often stumps people who are just starting out is that you have a great idea and you start with it and then it just dies somewhere. I mean, this happens to me all the time, and it definitely did with this book, which is why I would say don't stop. Think of some other story where some other great character exists and that you've written, and bring that character into the book where you are now. Or sometimes, you know, this is my experience often. I'll be in the middle of something, and then I'll be sitting on the train. I'm thinking, wow, there's another story that I would just love to tell, and I start to think about that. And what I've learned is to try to see where those two connect, because I think psychologically what happens is that our brains are always working on whatever story is down under there, you know, that you need to get to. And so you start to tell it one way, and then your brain says, wait a minute, you can also tell it this way. And you don't see that often. You don't make that connection consciously, but your brain is doing that. So if you can see how to bridge those two, I think you'll regenerate your story. You'll get life back into your story again, and you'll see how to tell it, and it'll give it interesting twists, because not even you are expecting them as a writer. And I think that's what bogs down people sometimes is, you know, you start to become too predictable because you think, okay, well, I've got to tell it this way, and you map it all out. And I think that it's great to have a map and to see sort of where you're going, but if you have to diverge from that map or if something else comes in that's really grabbing you, see how you can make that bridge. That's how I would answer that. I mean, I think that that's the way to get to compelling characters, make them do things you didn't expect them to be doing.
Can you give an example from the book?
Yeah, well, Sweetie Boy, which is this character I had invented long ago who existed in two other stories that I'd already published. They lived on their own. And I was writing this story about this sister and brother who seemed very far removed from Sweetie Boy, although all this takes place in Hillsborough. And I just was at a stopping point, and I thought, oh, I can't. And I thought, I just should write a story about Sweetie Boy. And so I started. I should make my novel circle around her. And she just wasn't. I couldn't get into her as a first-person character or as really the narrator of the story. And so I thought, I'm not going anywhere with any of this. So instead, I just brought her in and had her meet my characters. And all of a sudden, that gave it life. And I felt like, now I can do this. And now it got interesting. And I started to listen to their conversations in a different way that gave me more, when you get that feeling, right? When you just want to explore it and keep going with it. And that's the feeling I got. And then I knew, I'd hit on something. So that would be, I guess, my, little pearl of wisdom on that note is just if you have other ideas coming at you that you feel, I really want to explore this, see if you can weave it into what you already have, or have those people meet up with the people you already have going and see what happens.
What are some of the attributes, and this can go to everybody on the panel here, but if you would start us off, Martha, what are some of the attributes of characters what attributes make a compelling character? What about them? Do they have to be likable, for one thing? If they're not likable, then how do you pull that off so that the reader wants to stay with them?
Yeah, well, that's a really... My second book, which I'm just finishing now, is about this woman who's completely not likable. And I think it's harder to sell it, because... It's more difficult to write about, and this woman is in her 60s, it's more difficult to write about adults than it is to write about children. Because children are just, by nature, going to be sympathetic. Even if they're not likable, there's hope. There's somewhere you can, you're going to extend yourself as a reader to them. An unlikable adult is hard to get the reader into and to bring him or her along with. But I think that, one thing is just to try to surprise yourself as you're writing. I think that, to me, no matter what kind of character you're writing, is to think, okay, my character's going to do this, and then try to just make him or her do the opposite and see what happens. Because I think that that's what happens in the books that I feel are the most, just aren't really going anywhere, is that the writer was too much in control, just was too heavy-handed, just wanted to hold on to the character's reins too tightly. And if the writer's not being surprised, if the writer's not having fun with it, then the reader's not going to. So, yeah, you know, in terms of attributes, I don't know. I mean, I think there are lots of different characters that can be compelling and can be completely different. I don't think there's any one particular attribute. But one thing I have noticed when I'm just starting out is giving a character a tick. Like something, for instance, you know, a guy who, I had one of my characters take off his ring and constantly be turning it. And for some reason that helped me to see him more clearly. Just because he could do that and I had him do that in certain scenes, other things started to become clear to me, whereas he'd been very opaque before. So,
I think that for me, if the character has to want something badly enough, and I think that's when we can grab a hold of them, because we all have had that frustration of whatever it is, wanting a person, wanting a thing, wanting a job, wanting to change ourselves. You know, I wish I wasn't this way. And I think that desire is what we get a hold of, even if it's something that we don't particularly like about the character, or we find the character in other ways unlikable. We can empathize with that need that drives us to reach some kind of goal or make some kind of change or accomplish something. And so what's turning the wheels inside the person, I think, is what makes them compelling characters. What do they want? And what won't they admit they want? Often they have a superficial thing. I want to, you know, lose 40 pounds, don't we all? But there's something else underneath that. There's another thing driving that, a need for acceptance, someone who's always in dialogue with her mother, perhaps, or her father, or his father. Always, even though they're trying to accomplish this, there's a backstory. And so trying to find out the levels of what people need and what they admit they need and what they don't. I'm working right now with a character who's different from me because she's not entirely reliable, because she doesn't know herself, although she thinks she does. And so trying to follow her voice and approaching this novel really differently. What you say about controlling. I've always been someone who pretty much knew where the book was going, and in this case it's coming in bits. The voices are just coming in bits, and she's saying things and doing things, and I'm just following it and letting it evolve and knowing that at some point it's going to start going straight through. But at this point I just have to take what she's giving me, because she's coming that way in bursts, and they're very clear bursts. They're almost like little bits of clairvoyance where I can hear her talking, and I'm just, you know, and then I'm not sure. I have a big overview, but I don't have it planned out as thoroughly as I usually do. So I'm having to trust this one more.
Well, it sounds like one of the things, and I'm having to learn this as I mature as a writer, is to be patient with your book and to be patient with the characters and let them reveal themselves slowly. I'm hearing both of you saying, sort of indirectly, that it takes a lot of time to really have a character that's really well developed and fleshed out and has a lot of issues and is motivated by the same kinds of things we all are. And for that to reveal itself on the page, do you think you can do that quickly, or does it take a lot of time?
I think for some characters just jump out and all of a sudden they're there and they're fully formed. But I think it's already taken a lot of time, even if you're not aware of it. It's been in the back of your mind somewhere, or you've just been, you know, you've had that growing in you for so long, and they boom, are on the page. And then I think there are others, and I think this is generally the case, at least it is with me, where it takes a long time because you want, and your own wants get in the way of writing fiction, I think, too. You know, sometimes I want to portray somebody I know. I just want to. And so I put that person into my fiction, and it just isn't working. It doesn't work with the book. So, you know, I keep forcing it, and then I realize that is just not the character that can be in this book right now. So, you know, I have to let the book dictate that for me and see what else I can find. You know, sometimes I'll just put in a random tick or attribute of this character and see what happens and where that leads me, because I think this is just not the person for this particular book. So, you know, I think it just depends on where you station the character in terms of, you know, hierarchy. You know, is it the narrator, or is it, but also how long you've been living with that character in other ways, and people who write more autobiographically, and then people, you know, who tend to write more sort of science fiction or.
I think that we're getting to know these characters just like someone, if we meet here tonight, we know a certain amount right up front, and then we grow with the character, or the character's growing and we're growing with the character and coming to understand and coming to accept the character being who that person is as an individual, as a living, breathing person.